we would encourage them to get help. And this was their last chance. Look, you can turn around to the back of the room and you can seek these services. And from there, it's basically tell everybody in your clique that if anyone commits a triggering offense, the whole group gets traded like a baseball card.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We've got a special guest today, North Carolina Supreme Court Associate Justice, Phil Berger. Hello, thank you for joining.
Hey Dan, thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. How did we meet?
Well,
or how did we come into contact? I don't really remember.
Yeah, I was listening to Drinking Bros, and you were interviewing Clark Pennington with the Independence Fund. And Clark was talking about a pre-sentencing program that he does with the Independence Fund. And sort of an idea for a program in North Carolina came to mind, and I messaged you on social media, said, hey, Dan, what do you think about this? Is this worth pursuing? And then you connected me with Sarah and the Independence Fund, and sort of went from there. And it's been just a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's I think what you're doing is important. What Clark has done is important, and it's gone on in other places before to a different degree. We talked about it a little bit last night, but the one that existed prior was called Critical Time Intervention, and there was a 32-state grant, I think, but it was a limited scope program, and essentially it was mostly one of my buddies, Bryce, did it up in Virginia, but it was a pretty limited scope, where one person would go into a couple of departments in an area and try to train cops on how to deal with veterans, right? Now you guys collectively have brought this to a whole new level. We'll get into that in a bit. But first, let's get into to you. So it's Phil Berger Jr. Tell me about Phil Berger Sr.
So my father went to law school late in life. I was third grade. He was a press board operator at the local pulp mill factory in a really small town in North Carolina. And he's standing at the end of the press board machine one day, and they're just coming out one after the other. And so my grandparents, his family, my mother's family, were all Milltown, right? So everyone worked in the mill. And he's standing at the end of this press board machine one day, and he says, I want something different. So he enrolled in community college, worked his way through college with two small kids. Took him 9 years to get his undergrad degree. And then during that process, he decided he wanted to go to law school. Goes to law school and ends up in small town in North Carolina, has a very successful law practice, and becomes a leader in the community. Ultimately runs for the North Carolina Senate and is successful in his bid, and he's been in the Senate now for a number of years. He currently serves as the President Pro Tem of the North Carolina Senate.
I don't know what that means.
So interestingly, in North Carolina,
so, is he a senator with an assigned district, or he's somebody outside of that, or how does that work?
Yeah. So in North Carolina, senators are elected by district.
Yeah.
So the small community that we lived in elected him to go to the Senate, but in that capacity, he became minority leader. And then when the Republicans took over the North Carolina General Assembly, he was elected what's called President Pro Tem of the Senate. A number of years ago, there was some legislation that stripped a lot of the leadership power from the lieutenant governor and gave it to the President Pro Tem. So in essence, that position is the leader of the Senate.
Okay, interesting. And what impact did that have on you, I guess, seeing your dad go from essentially, I don't know how much money that person makes, but that seems like lower middle class or middle class, to somebody who's a professional, like a white-collar professional, right?
Well, and so in North Carolina, the legislature is part-time. So he makes $13,000 a year.
Right. But as an attorney, probably a little more than that, hopefully, right?
Right, yeah. So in small town law practice is not very lucrative, but you can do a lot of positive things in terms of leadership, and you can have a nice life. and then he sort of transitions into this role where he's gone a great deal of time serving the public, and we were in the same law practice at that point, and worked together for a few months, and then all of a sudden he's gone. But it was very impactful for me in a number of ways. One, I had to take care of the business with very little experience in the legal practice, and in terms of service to the community, just an excellent example.
Yeah, and then you get into law yourself at some point. Was that right out of high school? You had decided that you were going to do that, or before that maybe?
No, my goal all along was to be a coach and a teacher. I wanted to be a high school teacher.
Okay.
And somewhere in undergraduate schooling, I decided I wanted to take a different path and go to law school. And so once I graduated from UNC Wilmington, I took a couple of years off and started law school. Never really intended to do that, but just sort of at some point that career path flipped.
And what do you think the impetus for that was?
So I look up to my dad. So a lot of that is sort of following in his footsteps.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I guess, but there is a great deal of interest in helping serve the community.
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of for men, it's like you're either trying to live up to the image you have of your dad, or you're trying, if you had a bad relationship like I did, you're trying to repair the damage you think he did to people. I think that's a pretty common trajectory for folks. And it makes sense, right? I mean, that's the thing that you're most closely, I guess, familiar with as you're growing up, as your brain is developed. Like your brain develops from 16 to 25 in a major way. So, tell me about your private law experience. How was that?
Very interesting.
Did you have a particular focus? Was it criminal defense or something else? What did you do exactly?
So in a small town, you sort of have to be a general practitioner.
Sure.
And did a lot of criminal work, a great deal of domestic work with custody cases and those sorts of things. At some point, I got the contract for the Department of Social Services, or with the Department of Social Services, where I would do their abuse, neglect, and dependency cases for parents who had abused children, and then the government has to step in and either correct path or remove the children from the home. And that was interesting, and I think work that was helpful to the community.
Sure, yeah. That's a weird job to be in, to be honest, because you're like, I mean, I know those people care about what they're doing. Like when I thought of school teachers in the 80s, these days it seemed there's a lot of activist people there, but a school teacher in the 80s, it's like, that's a thankless and not very well paying job. So you're doing it for a reason, right? And then in 2006, you get elected DA. And what made you decide to run for district attorney?
Well, it was the work with the Department of Social Services that really did it. There was a disconnect between the cases that were coming through my courtroom and the cases that were being prosecuted in criminal court. And
what do you think it was?
Lack of focus, right? We want to focus on other areas as opposed to children. And we had this particular case that was troubling, where a quadriplegic youth had been abused by an in-home aide. And there was no apparent desire to prosecute that case. And so a couple of things like that take place in front of you. And the idea at that point is, well, somebody's got to do something. I know you talk about this a lot. Somebody's got to do something. And I was somebody. Right. So step up and try to make a change. And, we were successful. We beat a 13-year incumbent who was very popular. But people... when they, a lot of secrets sort of in the courthouse, right? Most people don't pay attention to it. Most people don't have daily interaction with the courthouse. But when people understand sort of the crevices that some of these cases can fall in, it becomes more meaningful to them.
Yeah, and even when they do get scooped up and prosecuted, the sentencing for sexual assault, particularly against children, is comically low. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any kind of insight on why? I believe the average sentence for a sexual assault against a minor is 18 months. Right. Now, I'm sure you can guess what my sentence would be for that. But you're an actual legal professional, so that's one thing I don't understand. I just can't wrap my mind around. I thought that no matter what people's politics were, that the protection of kids would be something that everybody could get on board with. But that seems to not be the case, and it isn't a matter of right versus left always. It's a very bizarre situation, and I don't understand it.
Well, and so I think there are a number of factors. One is what's your focus, right? And if your focus is on protecting kids, then certainly I think that you get on the higher end of that average. But there are also a number of ways that those cases can be disposed of, right? So you could plead someone to an indecent liberties charge, which gets probation, and there are any number of excuses you can make not to prosecute a case. So you have witnesses recant, you have sort of discrepancies in testimony, those sorts of things. And it's difficult with kids because maybe they sometimes repeat things that they hear. So there are a lot of questions that come into these cases that may be absent physical evidence. But if you have well-trained people who are focused on children, then I think those results are a little bit better.
Sure. And the recidivism rate for a crime of any type for someone who commits sexual assault is 40%. It's pretty high, but consistent with other career criminals, right? And I don't know that soft punishment's really going to change that. Although, I don't know what your experience is in research, but as far as the death penalty goes, it's not a deterrent. The research shows that it's not a deterrent for violent crime. For whatever reason, people I guess if you're going to be on the street shooting people in the face, you don't care about getting electrocuted to death. You know what I mean? So, but I do think that on the lower end, or the research shows on the lower end, that not just the length of punishment, but consistent convictions are a deterrent. So I've always been kind of curious. I'm glad that people like you got it, because there's a lot of DAs across the country that are funded by George Soros, right? That's not a conspiracy theory. There's 275 DA and judge races he's financed in the last 5 years. That's a fact. And you can look it up. I don't know why we're allowing that, but here we are. So speaking of that, you served 2 terms, I believe, as DA. Is that right?
I did. Yes, sir.
Okay. And then how does that work? Is it like you get elected to Congress and you I want to get on these committees and make this specific difference in my community? Did you have something like that going into your time at DA?
Well, yeah, and the focus was I want to change the way we prosecute sexual assaults and crimes against children. One, and I think we did that. We were able to build what's called a Child Advocacy Center in our small community, which had not been done, which improves the ability to prosecute cases, helps law enforcement understand sort of questions that need to be asked, what procedures need to be followed. We incorporate nurses who are specially trained in sexual assault kits and those sorts of things. So that was the one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we did. And the other thing was to try cases. I think there's a need to plead a number of cases. The system just can't try 100% of the cases. But you also have to, at some point, hold people's feet to the fire, right? We are not going to plead this case out. We're going to take you in front of a jury, and we're going to let the jury determine what your punishment is or what your conviction is, as opposed to the DA saying, we're going to consolidate all these cases and give you probation. So we were able to do, I think, very good work on both those fronts. We went from probably somewhere around 2 or 3% of the cases that got tried prior to me up to about 7 or 8%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a huge change when you're talking about 1,500, 2,000 cases going through as felonies every year.
And it wasn't just about prosecution for you either. You were the chair of Project Safe in Rockingham County. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that was a fun partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office. So it sounds, and when it was first pitched to me, it sounds a little bit like hug-a-thug type policies, but it's really not. What we did was we brought in gang leaders from. Most people don't think there are gangs in these small communities, but we had identified several of the leaders of the local gangs, and we brought them into what's called a call-in. Now, all of these individuals have probation hanging over their head, child support hanging over their head, and we sit them in the middle of this room, and you have law enforcement officers, DEA, ATF, myself, and the local assistant U.S. attorney, and we tell them, look, you have a choice. And if you choose to commit what's called a triggering offense, right? If you use a firearm in the commission of a crime, every one of the people sitting around this table is coming after you. And this doesn't sound very good now, but the way the AUSA and I would tell people is, look, you guys are like baseball cards, right? It is who can get the biggest sentence off of this guy. And we met frequently in an effort to reduce gang violence and gang crime in Rockingham County. And one of the really things I'm proud about with that program, we had 212 individuals that were ultimately called in. We only had 3 who recidivated. So out of and that program went on probably about 4 years. You know, I don't know if it's still taking place now, but it was one that was very successful.
Well, aside from just, general stick and carrot, what was the program like? I mean, walk me through. I'm a gang leader that sells drugs and shoots people or whatever the fuck. It certainly isn't 200 dudes in a room and you have a one-time meeting and say that and then everything works out, right? So explain that process to me.
Right. So everyone that we called in was on probation.
Right. So they're forced to come in a certain amount of time anyways to do drug tests and stuff like that.
Right.
Okay.
And so we basically had the equivalent of a lottery. Okay. Who are the first groups that get called in? And then in addition to the law enforcement officers who have a role in sort of the stick, we have a number of service providers who came in. If you needed a GED, if you needed help getting squared away on your child support, those sorts of programs, mental health counseling, drug testing, drug counseling, we would encourage them to get help. And this was their last chance. Look, you can turn around to the back of the room and you can seek these services. So you have the call-in procedure. Probation requires you to be there, and from there, it's basically tell everybody in your clique that if anyone commits a triggering offense, the whole group gets traded like a baseball card.
That's interesting. So there's been. I don't know exactly, and I don't want to drag you into this conversation too far, but there's been a conversation between, in my opinion, between the federal government and the Sinaloa cartel, because they're enforcing a no fentanyl policy. That's happening. My people at Border Patrol are telling me that Chapo's 3 sons are executing anybody who sells fentanyl at the border now. It feels like that's a very extreme example, but it feels like, and I have no evidence of this specifically, but it feels like the federal government probably leveraged that into action. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. Like the cartels wouldn't have done it. And I wonder, so if people get, the point of the criminal justice system isn't to imprison people, right? It's to keep the country safe, frankly. Like you have to take it down to the lowest common denominator. What exactly is the purpose of all this? Sometimes it means putting people in prison. But sometimes you make deals with people to try to get them. I mean, it's almost like fishing. You're putting some bait out there and like, hey man, life doesn't have to be like this for you. Some people grow up in a situation where they think that's the only option. I'm sure El Chapo's sons didn't see, like they weren't going to go become pediatricians, right? They were going to be in the cartel. But this is a different situation because we can actually offer some of these people help. People get stuck in this weird cycle from a very young age and then make some mistakes, and now they're on paper and the rest of their life is defined by something they did at 17, 18, or 19 years old, right? They feel like they can't get a job anymore, which is sometimes true. They feel like banks treat you differently. Everybody treats you differently, right? Do you think there's any utility in offering to expunge records in exchange for leaving the criminal lifestyle? I mean, expunge them off their record entirely.
Absolutely. I think all of us have made really stupid decisions, and unfortunately,
what is it there? But for the grace of God, go I, right?
Absolutely.
Could have been me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so part of being a prosecutor, right? The only person in a courtroom charged with doing justice is the prosecutor, right? The defense attorney, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case, is charged with zealously representing their client, right? Getting the best result that they can.
Sure.
The judge is supposed to apply the law fairly and evenly to everyone who comes before him or her. But the prosecutor's duty, at least as defined in North Carolina, is specifically to do justice. And like you said, some of that is certainly sending people to prison for a long time. But there's also the need for deferral programs for knuckleheads who make really dumb decisions, and we don't want to saddle them for the rest of their lives with a felony conviction or even sometimes a misdemeanor conviction that, like you said, will prevent them from getting a job, prevent them from being productive members of society, which then leads to more criminal activity. So I'm a huge proponent of expungement and deferral programs.
Yeah. Is this a guy who's fucked in the head, or is it somebody who made a mistake? You can't treat those two people the same way, because if you do treat them the same way, you will get the same result, which is an institutionalized career criminal, frankly. I mean, most of the time, that's what you're going to get for a variety of reasons. One, if somebody gets a long prison sentence in a way that could have been deferred, then they get legitimately institutionalized into the prison lifestyle. A lot of people can't convert back out of that, almost the same as a veteran coming back home. They just can't get their mind around having all this result. Like, I spent 3 years having everything done for me and told to me, right? And then add on top of that a heightened sense of stress and awareness. It sounds a lot like a deployment, frankly, right? And then you go back home, not to compare the two directly, but then you go back home and you're like, all right, now what? And it's the poison of man, especially not I don't know how it affects women, but I know how it affects men to be on a rigid schedule and then be back home and have nothing to do, right? Idle hands are the devil's plaything, and it fucks with your head. And you add on top of that all these, the negative effects of having been incarcerated. If you treat the psychopath that way, fine, right? Let's keep him. Like, I want people to be as free as possible, but I don't want, as Joe Biden used to say back when he was, I guess, somewhat rational in the early 90s, I don't want this guy out on the street cracking my wife over the head with a lead pipe. Sorry, that's just not, I'm not going to bargain with you over that. If you're a psychopath, you're going away forever. But some dumb kid who does something dumb for so many reasons. One, for his sake. Two, for our collective sake, because that guy costs, what, $50,000 a year to keep in prison, something like that. That's more money the taxpayers are spending. It's like, there's a lot of reasons to, aside from just ethical reasons, a responsibility to mentor people and help them. There's a lot of reasons to not just throw that dude away, right? So these are good programs. Project Safe is a good program. And you had that much experience in 4 years, you said? 212 people?
Right.
And then 3 were recidivists?
We only had 3 recidivists, and then we shifted focus to violent felons. So we started with gang members, and then we went to violent felons. And again, that you can look at it and you can say this is sort of a soft on crime program, but the results speak for themselves. These people who are identified as violent, people who engage in violent behavior, stop doing it.
And so the success rate when you started targeting violent felons was also pretty high.
Yeah, and I don't remember the statistics on that.
What do you think it is going on? You were face to face with some of these people, right? What did that look like? What did the trajectory look like? I mean, I've seen people who were institutionalized before, and you're almost deprogramming them at that point. It's largely fear based. You know what I mean? And that's a hard thing to deprogram because this person thinks that they're fighting to survive. They think they're fighting for their life, like an animal with its back in the corner. And we think of, oh, this guy just taking the easy way out and selling drugs so he can make money. That's not really what it is. You know, most of the time. There are people like that, certainly. But that's usually not what from the streets in the inner cities. That's not what it is. People think they're fighting for their existence. You know what I mean? And you can't negotiate reasonably with somebody like that unless you have a carrot or a pathway to somewhere other than where they are, right?
Yeah, and so with us, one of the main talking points, one of the main things that we tried to impress upon the individuals who came before us was, look, do you want to spend the next Christmas and the next Christmas and the next holiday or birthday away from your child, away from your family? You've already done it, right? Think about how you felt then. And so that's a very strong motivator for anybody, right? You know, do you want to spend time away from your family, or do you want to be back in society? So that's one of the at least when I was involved in it, to me, that was one of the more powerful messages. There was a video that we played with all these hardcore gangbangers who had gotten jobs, and one of the themes throughout was, look, I get to be with my child now. So very at a base level, that is applicable to all of us.
Yeah, and I think educating the public on this a bit more as well. Like, it's hard to have empathy when somebody's stealing your shit, right? So, and I understand that that's a reasonable way to feel. But this trope of the career criminal that's a violent sociopath who's like goes home and beats their wife and kids every night, it's not really accurate. You know what I mean? It just doesn't. Certainly those things happen, but the reality is that even criminals love their children, right? It's like that is a human being. So how do I repair this human being? Stop thinking about it in all these other terms, because I think it doesn't really help that much. And this, your time at DA was successful, right? And now you run for Supreme Court in North Carolina. That's in 2016?
That was 2020. So
2020, okay. How was that? I mean, that's a different animal, right? Is that a statewide election?
It is.
Okay.
In North Carolina, a partisan statewide election. And so if I could go back,
sure, yeah,
just for a second, I was elected to the Court of Appeals in 2016.
Okay, that's the Court of Appeals, I see.
And did not want to run. But I received several phone calls that encouraged me to run. And it's interesting how some people can see things in you that you really don't see in yourself. Never really wanted to be a judge. I'm more of a fighter than sort of an umpire. I enjoyed playing and not being on the sidelines, so to speak. But I was encouraged to run for that seat and was successful then. And the same sort of thing happened in 2020, where a vacancy takes place and people start to call you and say, hey, you should really look at this. And so we did. And running for judge is a bit different. You cannot stake yourself out on issues. You can't tell people what you think. So every candidate just about sounds something to the effect of, I'm going to be fair, I'm going to follow the law, and I am a constitutionalist. Doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. That is the sort of standard line from everybody who runs for judge. And there's not the opportunity to raise a great deal of money. Most people don't care about judicial races. There is difficulty getting your message, to the extent there is one, across. So we are really tied to what takes place at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, I mean, so you won as a Republican in a year when a Republican didn't win the state, right? I don't think Trump won North Carolina in 2020.
No, he did. He did.
He did. Okay.
Yeah, but governor and attorney general.
Right, the governor. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I knew I had something right there. So yeah, I mean, it seems like the judge races that we're familiar with are usually SCOTUS, right? and it's been a bit of a shit show in the past couple of years, very partisan, unnecessarily so. There's like everybody's got their litmus test these days for it, but the only one should be constitutionality. That should be the only litmus test. And you've actually had your, I guess, let's call it, you've had your constitutional bona fides tested before because you had to rule in a case against your dad, right? Technically speaking. But that happens, right? There's always court cases like that happen where, and I think, can you walk me through that? Are you comfortable talking about that? Because I read some news articles about it and it was like, oh, he's got to recuse himself. It's like, well, why? It's still a constitutional issue, right?
Right. So we have a group that sort of supervises judicial ethics, right? And
what's the name of the group?
The Judicial Standards Commission in North Carolina.
Okay. And who do they report to?
To the Supreme Court.
Okay.
So, but as things come up, we have the ability to ask questions,
and it's like the Senate Rules Committee, right? I mean, you just have a separate group of people. It's not technically they're still senators, but it's a separate group of people. Like, okay, here are who is it? There's a person in the Senate that has, he's like the expert on the rules of the Senate. What's the
parliamentarian?
Parliamentarian, that's it. Yeah, God, I can never remember that word. Yeah, anyways, keep going.
Yeah, so we have the ability to ask questions, right? And during that process, the difference between the judicial standards and the parliamentarian, all of this is confidential, right? So they're basically lawyers for judges who say, help me with this ethical question, right? So one of the grounds for recusal in North Carolina is that your family member is a named party in a lawsuit.
Okay.
That makes sense, right? Yeah. So if there's a land dispute involving my brother,
sure,
you certainly wouldn't think you'd get a fair shot if I were the judge, right?
Right.
But the case law in North Carolina says somebody who's sued in their official capacity, right, is not the individual, right? So
because it's about the office and not the person at that point, right?
Right.
That makes sense.
So they're technically suing the state of North Carolina and the President Pro Tempore of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in their official capacity. So a number of recusal motions were filed because of my potential participation in the case, and ultimately there were. Sort of a long, drawn-out process. But the Supreme Court ultimately, because there were a number of questions for a number of justices, passed a rule that if the individual justice believes they can be fair, then they can sit on the case, right? So you ask judicial standards, but the ultimate decision maker becomes the justice. And again, to me, that's fairly obvious that just because my father is named, if he's sued in his official capacity,
sure.
That's not an issue.
And it's different than the Supreme Court too, because voters have an opportunity to correct what they might think of as a mistake if it should appear that way, right?
Sure.
Because it's not a lifetime appointment. As an appeals judge, certainly it's not a lifetime appointment.
Right.
Is the North Carolina Supreme Court, is that what are the terms for that, or is that a lifetime appointment?
No, it's 8 years.
8 years. Okay.
So I think that's good that we have to basically put our resume in front of the voters. Ultimately, the jury tends to make the right decision. And even on an 8-year term, you see judges who sort of forget what it's like to be in the courtroom. And the requirement that you go back to some of those individuals who are involved in the court process, the public who can ask you questions, I think that's an important. We do it in a way that is public, transparent, and ultimately the people get to decide.
Sure. Well, how much different was it being a judge than a DA? Because DA, you're like reviewing and preparing cases. I don't know that did you litigate as a DA, or did you let your team do that? You litigated as well?
I did some.
Okay.
There's a hefty administrative burden.
Yeah. But this is a completely different job, right? As a judge, you're listening a lot more than you're talking at that point. So what was the transition like for that? Is there like do they give you how to be a judge for dummies or some shit? Like how do you certainly you know the law and you know how to adjudicate cases and stuff like that. You know how to write opinions certainly, but this is a very different world, these two jobs.
So we have training for our trial court judges that is weeks long, and they have to come back every 6 months or so. But for an appeals judge in North Carolina, there is zero training.
Oh, really?
You walk in and you're given a bunch of cases and told go to work. But I think, again, a prosecutor's job is to do justice. Right, to take in all of the information, all of the facts, and try to come up with a resolution that fits this individual situation. And I think that training is critical, at least for me, it was critical. So over the course of the 8 years as a DA, I'd made thousands of decisions that I had to stand in front of the public and justify and talk about. So I think for me, I was well prepared to jump in to the role. Now, one of the things that we do that's different, in an appellate court, we don't have a jury box, we don't have a witness stand, you don't have people yelling objection. So the writing aspect was a little more difficult for me. But in terms of just base level ability, I felt very comfortable.
And then I mean, it's part of the bureaucratic process no matter where you are, I guess, but you learn to depend on your staff who's been around for a little while, people that are in unelected positions that know the rules, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. So you're in, how long were you in the appeals court? 4 years before you ran for judge? Ran for Supreme Court?
Yeah, 4 years.
And what was that like running a statewide campaign? I've worked on statewide campaigns before. It's a tricky business.
So it's interesting because again, nobody knows who the judges are. So
unless it's like a friend of yours and you tell everyone, oh yeah, I'm voting for Phil.
Right.
Yeah. People don't pay attention to judge race. They should certainly, but
yeah. But
anyways.
So if I were to show up at an event, everybody at that event was like, oh my goodness, we have a judicial candidate here. So it's people are very pleased. And interested when you show up because they have questions about what do you do. But the flip side of that is also true. You cannot be there and nobody's going to miss you, right? So when I ran for the Court of Appeals the first time, I was actually coaching high school football and baseball. So doing all that, and during the week I was doing my job and then coaching, and on the weekends I was killing myself going to events and making phone calls and that sort of thing. Supreme Court was different. I had to step away from coaching because at that level, people expect you to be present a little more.
Were you on a ticket with some other people? Like a lot of times in statewide campaigns for smaller offices, you'll see like a DA, a judge, and a sheriff all on the same placards and stuff like that. Did you have an association or whatever you're going to call that?
So we had a slate of candidates that the Republican Party promoted us as a slate. And again, that's effective because we rise and fall with the top of the ticket. So to the extent people identify us with the Republican label, that was very effective. And the party did a really good job of that.
I want to get back to the sports thing. So you were coaching high school sports. Were your kids there at the time, or you were just there coaching?
So I started coaching prior to my children getting into high school, and was able to coach during most of their career.
What made you decide to get into it?
So I'd always wanted to be a coach, and in fact, when I graduated from law school, I coached high school football, and just I played football in high school, played baseball in college, and just
UNC Wilmington.
Guilford College.
Okay,
so I went to a Division III school for a short time. But to me, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned in athletic pursuits, and I think it's important to have judges, members of the legal community, active with kids because all they see or hear sometimes is how negative. Or that there are negative results from the courthouse, but if they know a judge or they know an attorney, they may feel a little more confident about what comes out of that process. So, just lucky that I got to work with some really good coaches and some really good kids.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, being part of the process is the very least you can do as a human being. That's why I say that, somebody's got to do something. Attitude has got to stop. It's nice, to be able to just say that. It's nice to, I don't know. I mean, it's the country's not going to get better. It's easy to black pill. It's easy to say, you know what, this is the entire system's corrupt, so I'm not going to get involved in it. It's easy to do. That's the easy way out. The hard way is to do stuff that's actually going to make the country better. And I think, sure, there's external bad actors funding judges and DAs across the country. There's no question about that. So the only logical solution to that, from my perspective, is for good people to do the same thing, right? Like you meet the enemy where they are and you crush them. That's how you do that. So talk me through this process. Like if there's somebody out there and they have this keen sense of justice, they understand the Constitution well and are well read and good writers and stuff like that. They have the, I guess, pre-existing conditions to be good at that particular sort of job. Walk me through the process. Like if you were 18 again in your job and you wanted to become a judge, tell me how you do that.
Well, I would have read more coming through. I think I got a very good education coming through, but sort of the internal desire to read the Federalist Papers and some of those things it was there, but it wasn't. And sort of the discipline to have a reading program would have benefited me much better. I think the other thing that the ability to observe and listen. I tend to shoot my mouth off before I should, and again, that discipline to be able to sit back and analyze and sort of come to a better understanding of facts and outcomes is something that people can learn. And I wish I would have been a little more patient in some circumstances.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say that now as an adult, as a real adult, you know what I mean, who's been around for a while. Listening when you're 22 is not the easiest thing to do, right? Because you know everything. I don't need to listen to this guy. I already figured all this shit out. I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about me. I like that energy. It's good, but a little bit more mentorship. And I know you guys take on clerks, people that are in between undergrad and law school, and then after they get out of law school, sometimes they'll serve as well. What's that process like for a Supreme Court justice? Do you have the time and ability to mentor people, or is it something that it's just like, here, do this paperwork, kid? I mean, it's a busy job.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I'm really excited about. Again, my goal was always to be a teacher and a coach, and I've been able to do the coaching part of it, and now I'm doing the teaching part. We have an internship program that I created at the Court of Appeals and have carried over, where we take between 7, 9, 11 law students over the summer, and we allow them to basically try out to be a clerk. We run them through the ringer. We teach them how to write cases, write opinions, do the research, and ultimately what we've done is we have allowed that to be a tryout for the people who become my clerks. So the individuals who I hire to work for me at some point had to come through this program, and not only have they gained the knowledge and experience to be able to work at the Supreme Court. I mean, we've been able to help place these kids who are just phenomenal, by the way, and just off the charts smart. But we've been able to help improve their writing to such an extent, or at least help them improve their writing, so that they can get really, really good jobs helping people. And we try to push them. I know you're not a fan of the government, but I do think it's important that we have conservative voices participating in the government. And so we try to encourage them to go into government service because they can have a huge impact.
Yeah, I think writing is really important because writing is thinking. it's thinking in a way that you can look at what you were thinking and be like, you know what, that's not right. My jump from here to here was incorrect, or my logic here, if you track it down, these 3 paragraphs doesn't make sense anymore. I think it's really important. Like, I encourage people to write, even if it's just journaling or something, because you can go back later or even in the moment. So we do this when we're doing audiobooks. Ross or one of our buddies will write an audiobook. We'll all help do the audio for it. We'll go through and read it out loud. Like, we read our words out loud. You know what? That doesn't sound good. In my head at the time when I wrote it, it sounded good, but now I've got to say it out loud in front of people in a courtroom, maybe, right? I have to, or I post, if you're in the Supreme Court, there's many of your opinions on and just forever on the internet, right? It's not like Twitter where you can delete them. These are a matter of public record. So yeah. I think but just from a young age, it's really good to be able to train people how to think that way and then examine their own work. I like to read backwards. I like to read like sentences in the paragraph and then read the paragraphs backwards and be like, all right, what are the facts of these 3 paragraphs, and is there continuity between them and stuff like that? I think it's a really good exercise. So how do you is that one of the measures by which you select these interns? Like, if they're good at writing already, or if they have potential to be, or how do you select them? Or is it another agency or something that selects the interns?
No, so we do our own selection, and we are not interested in grade point average or your class rank or anything like that. What we want is individuals who want to be clerks, and so we give everybody the opportunity, and we tell our interns when they first come in, look, at the end of the summer, you are going to be a better writer. And to follow up on your point about reading things out loud, we have story time where we go through opinions, and the interns or the clerks will read every line of an opinion to make sure that it's cohesive, it sounds right, it flows. But our process of selection is wide open because anybody can do the job if you have the discipline and desire.
Right.
And so I'm just, frankly, I'm a guy who would have never thought he would be the DA. I'm a guy who should never have been a judge or a justice on an appellate court if you were to look just at grade point average and class rank. But at some level, those metrics do not measure your willingness and your desire to be successful.
Right. And it's, having the underlying skill is a lot more important to me too than someone's performance so far, right? Especially if you're a leader. It's like, I'm looking for these elements that I can shape into this outcome. You know what I mean? I'm not looking for, if you're going out into the recruiting world looking for a pre-established outcome, you're going to be very disappointed. You know what I mean? Especially if you're building large teams or teams centered around one specific mission set, because you're going to get very disparate ideas. You not that we shouldn't have a variety of ideas, but there has to be a North Star for all these people. Like, we all point back in the same direction at some point. So that kind of diversity is the most important, in my opinion, is diversity, like diversity of thought, but centered around a single ethos, whatever it happens to be, in our case, liberty in the Constitution, right? And it's like, this has been a driving factor for you. It sounds like since you were in high school, wanting to mentor people and coach people, right? And then you get into the criminal justice system, and it occurs to you that there's a lot of veterans in the criminal justice system. So now we're catching up to present day almost, where you hook up with these guys, but you were doing stuff for veterans before the Independence Fund. So tell me about that.
Yeah, when I was DA, we would have one of the local veterans groups. I don't remember if it was American Legion or who, but they would have events where they would help homeless vets in the small community I was from. And we would go out with our laptops and do expungement clinics. So those veterans who were looking for jobs and were told, we just can't hire you because you've got a criminal conviction, we would do the research for them to see if they were eligible for expungements. And I think we help people in that situation. But it's an important community, especially in North Carolina, that we be able to help. And again, I think we've done a little bit of that.
Yeah, and then the Veteran Justice Initiative. There was already something called the No Veteran Left Behind Act, I think, before this started. But the Veteran Justice Initiative, tell me about what that is, like how it functions exactly. Because there's like dual parts, right? One of them is the check the box thing, and the other one is teaching police how to deal with people. So can you run me through that?
Yeah, so VJI is run through the Independence Fund and is headed up by Clark Pennington. And Clark is just, he's a hard charger on these issues. And he's done just a wonderful job of, like you said, training police officers. Over 3,000 police officers in North Carolina have been trained on veteran interactions, right? Crisis intervention with veterans. And that's just a huge program and a tremendous benefit to those communities. And they're still going at it. And they have partnership with some other individuals where they do jujitsu with the officers. They teach them safety protocols and self-defense, but then they teach them how to interact with veterans. And then the other part of VJI is sort of the courtroom-facing portion, the back end or negative end of that law enforcement interaction, where they help with deferral programs, help set up veteran treatment courts and these sorts of services that can improve outcomes for veterans.
And it's kind of like almost an institutional pretrial intervention. I think a lot of people are familiar with PTI, especially people who have brushed up against law enforcement over the years, like myself, for example. I've never been in PTI, but I know what it is. Yeah, it's what we were talking about earlier. The point of all this isn't to just arrest people and put them in prison or whatever. It's to use whatever leverage you have at your disposal to make more better people, I think, is probably the best way to put it. You know what I mean? Like knock the rough edges off of people so they can function in society a little bit without the baggage of having been in the criminal justice system. It's super important for veterans, even more so to some degree, right?
Right, and that's why the work the Independence Fund does with law enforcement is so important, right? If you can handle these situations, if you can address problems on the front end before they even get to the criminal justice system, again, you're going to improve outcomes and you have more control over what takes place.
So if I'm a veteran in North Carolina and I get arrested for something, what do I do?
Well, so I think the first thing would be to, if you can, call an attorney, talk to an attorney. But to the extent you have difficulty navigating the criminal justice system, you go in. One of the first things you do if you're taken before a judge, the judge is going to ask you, do you want a court-appointed attorney? Right. So everybody goes back and most people fill out the affidavit of indigency, and we've been able to implement what's called the Check the Box initiative in North Carolina. On that affidavit of indigency, where you're requesting a court-appointed attorney, you can designate your military status if you've served in the military. And that is a trigger to the judge, to the prosecutor, to the clerk, to all number of court actors, that this is somebody who may need special assistance. And, so we are still working on the communication piece. We're able to identify and quantify the number of veterans who come through the system now. What we're working on now is being able to transmit that information electronically to the Independence Fund. But we have counties that have already stepped up who are making the effort to, when they see that the box has been checked, they want to get that veteran help, so they will contact the Independence Fund.
And then you'll have to tune in to Drinking Bros to find out what the Independence Fund does, because Clark's going to be on that show and he can run you through that stuff. But yeah, this is a really good program. I mean, it's as I said before, there have been other things somewhat like this before, but primarily they were just on the there have been attempts at veterans courts. I think Washington tried one. I don't know if it's still in effect. Virginia tried one. I don't think it's still in effect, but they did do the critical training stuff. This is kind of in insofar as it attacks both sides, like the prevention of something and then also addressing it after the fact. I think it's the only one of its kind in the country right now. So it's no pressure or anything, but it's kind of, a test pilot to see if we're going to be able to do this at scale over time. I guess most of the pressure is on the Independence Fund to do that, but they seem to do pretty well under pressure, so I'm not too worried about that.
And Dan, if I could, this is easy. At least check the box is easy, right? If you are anywhere in charge of or have responsibility for these affidavits of indigency, you can amend that form. So if people across the country are interested in helping veterans in a very easy, at least just being able to identify them, this check the box is very easy to implement. But I want to also say that North Carolina has 8 veteran treatment courts in existence now, and 8 counties out of 100. So we've got some work to do. There's plans to bring 4 more online here very shortly. But veteran treatment courts are designed to assist veterans who have addiction or mental health issues. But the good thing about these, it's very rigorous programs, 12 to 18 month rigorous program. And as a DA, I've been, like I mentioned earlier, I've been pitched all of the feel good programs you can imagine. I was at a conference one time, and a lady was talking about a drug treatment court that she was involved in, and how the carrot for the defendants in this particular court was that if you had 2 negative drug screens, right? If you didn't piss hot twice, that the judge would do a cartwheel for you, right? So we're not circus monkeys, right? And that should not be a motivating factor for anybody, right? You ought to want to get your life cleaned up because you want to get your life cleaned up. Yeah. But with veteran treatment courts, not only do you have these specialty courts dedicated to veterans, but it's supported by veterans. So you get the kick in the pants that you need from somebody who's been through it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of it, is accountability. I mean, every recovery program that exists is set up that way, AA, everything. But, that coddling stuff, it doesn't work. I mean, they've tried it in California, Washington, Oregon, Utah, Salt Lake City did it. The Housing First projects for homelessness, right, for drug addicts mostly. And Housing First without being tied, Michael Schellenberger does great work on this. Housing First without some kind of, there's got to be a stick as well. There has to be some kind of punishment involved if you don't do the thing that you're supposed to do. That's just how life works. You know what I mean? Like, I know that I'm not supposed to put my hand in the fire. I know that. And if I put my hand in the fire, I'm going to get burned. But if my pain receptors started failing, I can put my hand in there and not feel anything, but I'm still getting burned. You know what I mean? So it has to be very obvious what the penalty is for something, I think. But there also has to be that graceful period where you can realize your mistake and change course. Otherwise, eventually, I guess we'll all just be in jail, right? I mean, it's just it's a really stupid way to think about things, I think. But I'm glad that you're out there doing the stuff that you're doing. I appreciate you initially reaching out. And pretty much anytime anybody reaches out to me, I just give them Sarah's number, no matter what it is. Like, some dude came to my house and wanted to cut the trees down in my front yard. I'm like, just call Sarah. Cut her trees down. No, that's stupid.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She is, yeah. She's that whole the Independence Fund is how I spend most of my free time, which is also how most of their employees spend most of their free time, so they don't have any. But it's good. Yeah, it's a great program. If you're thinking about donating to something out there, definitely give money to them because they use it to help other people. We got to get out of here. We got to get ready for this other show, but I appreciate you coming today. This has been illuminating the process, how everything works, and your life obviously is great, and I'm glad we were able to link up.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and thank you for what you do.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for that, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.